Hey, hello and welcome everyone to the tutorial mode of Don't Starve Together, or DST as I'll be calling it. Now, a couple of things to mention. There's a bit of a preface, so please bear with me. Let me get to the why of this series, because I was going to initially do a playthrough with the best character of the 17 characters in this game, who I thought covered all of the facets of the game. But while I was streaming my Megabase world right here, I came across a couple of new players, and I realized that when I did a demonstration world, this one over here, that this game, which does not really tell you how to play it internally, and the dynamic of being this communal game for both good and for ill, can cause a lot of rather unnecessary hurdles into coming into this game. I will not say this game is for everybody. However, I do believe that more players who interact with it would love it if it were not for these ills, because that's what we're trying to tackle here. So, instead of worrying about all of the interwoven, overlapping systems that go into this game's playstyles, even from its core source as a survival video game, I want to go over the very basics, because another game that I really like has this same issue. Perhaps you've heard of it. It's called Warframe. Warframe doesn't teach you how to play Warframe. The community teaches you how to play Warframe. Don't Starve Together doesn't teach you how to play Don't Starve Together, at least not in the very traditional sense of tutorials themselves, hence the name of this series. That also being said, I have a bad feeling towards the methodology that Klei has taken, and I'm certain that, as you'll see, they've taken some steps to backtrack on that as well. If you look at the title screen, the game's tagline is an uncompromising survival game filled with magic and science. To a degree, this is still very much true, even if you were to set things more, how shall we say, fair on yourself. However, all the same, I want to go forward with this. So if you're seeing this video, perhaps you are interested in learning the game from the beginning and don't want to have to deal with that. If you've been advised the same, like, don't go into this game not knowing what to do because you're gonna pull your hair out, or you're gonna end up hating it when you really rather shouldn't. Or perhaps you've tried it a few times and you're like, for crying out loud, I can't make it past day whatever, day 10 even. And the reason to come here, this is not all to replace or otherwise say that it's superior to, but I wanted to tackle something very basic here so that a fundamental same page understanding is acquired for anybody else going into this game. And I'm absolutely certain and hopeful that other DST content creators will take the idea and run with it and fill in any other gaps, because I am by no means perfect. I'm just a gamer trying to help the gaming community for games that he loves, DST being one of them. So, without further ado, let's get into this, shall we? Now, you might notice that I'm not on the title screen of the game. This is for a couple of reasons. I'm trying to avoid as much confusion as possible, which is funny because I'm showing you a list of all of the worlds I have on my PC. However, you'll be greeted with whatever title screen Klei has for a theme for what's going on. If they've released a patch on certain characters, they'll have a theme board featuring certain characters. If it's a certain season, like Christmas or Halloween or anything like that, they'll have something covering that. But the gist of it is that you have your title screen with its own music sometimes. Sometimes it's the vanilla DST music. However, what you will see on this side, whether you're playing, and this is of course applicable for PC and console, I'm going to mention that as well. The menu looks the same. You have join game, and then you have host game just a little bit lower. Then you have like options, settings, and all the other stuff, the shop, things like that. So, this tutorial is going to assume that you have little to no understanding or experience playing the game. DST, if you played Don't Starve, I might be able to assume a little bit of that, but don't worry, I'm going to retread old ground to again make sure everybody's on the same page. I'm going to... This is going to be a little bit interesting test for me, because I'm going to try and not overblow and go into too much depth any superior choices that might be doable at the same time. And if that doesn't make sense, that's okay. But what I'm trying to say is, I'm trying to, again, do just this. I'm going to cover the basics. We're not going to be doing anything super flashy. We're not going to be bringing it to a mega base world. We're just making a base with the sole goal of this game being this. Live 1 whole year in the game. And 1 whole year in the game is marked by going through all 4 seasons. And just for posterity, we're going to be doing them at default length of days. You can change this, but I digress. We'll be going over settings later. So it's going to assume that you're going to be doing this yourself. You can bring a friend if you wish. Just realize that the pacing of certain item acquisition and mapping and resource gathering will, of course, accelerate if you bring someone else with you. I feel this game is best with 1, maximum 2 other friends. So 2 to 3 players. Because 4 players plus makes the combat trivial as to be almost boring, but hey, if that's not your thing, that's totally fine. And 1 player seems to be more or less a very special challenge anybody might like to put upon themselves. So I know it's a game called Don't Starve Together, but a lot of us, for whatever reason, can have a bit of an issue with the together part of Don't Starve Together. So, I digress. We're going to be doing this solo. You do not have to, so bring a friend if you want. You guys can watch along and play along as you wish, of course. So we're going to be going off of that means. So, that being said, one of you, or just you yourself, is going to press host game. And then if you don't have a world already created, which is you don't have a save file, you're going to not have this screen. You're going to have a screen that's going to come after we press create new world. Obviously, if you don't have a world created, you're immediately going to be assumed to create a new world. Don't worry about these. These are all just my different files, and the copies are backup files that I've been doing because I've been making a Mega Base world. I've been practicing certain things, working on. That's another series. That's a whole other string of videos. So if you are here, hopefully that's the reason you want to do is you want to learn the game, or perhaps you were looking at the video that's going to supersede these videos later is my Warley walkthrough, which is more or less the advanced going on into intermediate, and then off you go. So perhaps I directed you over to these videos. However, whichever way, more than welcome. That being said, let's get into it. Don't worry about this particular screen, because it's only if you have a save file. If not, you're going to be going into this screen. Let's create a new world. Now, this one's not too hard to realize. This is effectively the best thing that Klei could do, sort of, with easy, normal, and hard mode, respectively. Survival is the one we're going to be playing on, but let me explain the others real quick. Endless is literally just what it sounds. Endless fun. Don't worry about dying, although I'm going to be honest with you, you shouldn't worry about dying, especially if you're new to this game, because it's going to happen. Silly things can happen, all that stuff, whatever. Endless is just a way to, you know, fully express yourself without any super restrictions upon yourself. Conversely, relaxed is... all these settings are really doing is they're setting up certain differences in the settings menu that's going to follow this screen for certain, you know, levels of difficulty. Obviously, relaxed shows, it says right there on the tin, you don't have to worry about dying to certain other challenges the game forces upon you, like weather or even the darkness, which is a very key facet of this game. Survival is more the middle ground, it's developer intent, that sort of thing. Wilderness is the same thing, but if you want a special twist, because every time you would die, it's you sort of like soft reset, you don't hard reset your entire world. Lights out is there is no sun or dusk. Is just the darkness. The game doesn't throw you in there with literally nothing but a single torch, but it does. In other words, don't worry about these. Do not pick Lights Out if you're new, or even relatively new. Do not pick Wilderness. If you wish to, pick Survival, Endless, or Relaxed, depending on how you prefer. But we're going to go with Survival. Now, this is the screen that's probably going to be a bit much for some people, because you have 5 tabs here. You probably don't know exactly what they do. Obviously, the base settings tab, this is specifically how your game file is going to be treated if you're online or not. We're going to go local because I'm not going to have anybody join in with me. It's just going to be me. So we might as well, just for extra safety, put it on one player. This is, in fact, going to be named... tutorial mode. just so that you can differentiate between the different save files. If you want to, a description if you go online, or leave it for public joining, that sort of thing. This is pretty much straight what it is. The icon is a question mark because we haven't chosen a character, we haven't actually created the worlds, gone to that, etc. This just gives you symbols for the game mode and the type of accessibility your game will have. Okay, so these two tabs are very important. You're going to hear me say that a lot, but please bear with me. Forests and caves. For the sake of this series, we are actually not really gonna go into the caves. Okay, I put a little asterisk there. We are gonna go into the caves in the literal sense that we are gonna go down to Sinkhole, which is the entrance to the caves from the above world, which is the forest, but only to do one thing, and that's collect light bulbs for an item that is very much helpful for the surface. Do these worlds interact with each other? Not particularly. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. But you can indeed bring things in and above from... You can bring things from above world to the caves, you can bring things from the caves to the above, and that is going to be a very big player in advanced motion of taking your gameplay. We're just going to focus on the overworld. But I'm not going to disable caves because they allow you for a very useful light source that I believe every beginner should be aware of, so they're not constantly stumbling over having to stop, make torches, or make a campfire, which is separate from a fire pit, which is more permanent, but anyway. So, each of these tabs are a different shard, if you will, of the world. This is the overworld, this is the caves. So, looking at the forest, you have two settings here. World settings and world generation. Let's start with world generation. Why? Because whatever settings you place on this tab are permanent for the file. You cannot change them during gameplay. On world settings, you can, with certain, lengths to whether or not the effectiveness happens immediately. But in other words, you can immediately set changes in your current gameplay with world settings, not with world generation. So this is very important. Let's get this out of the way here. For the sake of understanding, if you're on console, I will mention this right now, actually, while we're on the subject. If you're playing console, I am sorry. I started this game on PlayStation 4. Really fell in love with it. If I've played thousands of hours and I'm making videos on it, I guess you can't say I don't love it. But you have less options and are indeed playing an inferior version of the game. This is not all to dog on you, because after all, like myself, played for 2.5 years on PlayStation 4. Before finally coming over to PC, and my gosh, I could go back, but man, am I going to be really... Yeah, anyway, you get it. Sorry. You can indeed still enjoy this game, but I guess the best, you don't know what you're missing, I suppose. You can't get through that game, and you know what? If I get enough requests, I might just do a playthrough on my PlayStation 4 to help out anybody who, for whatever reason, can't really manage to get a hold of a PC or a gaming laptop. But I digress. You have less options, but you do have certain options. I guess the best equation to size is you either have a normal sized world or a huge sized world, or sorry, large on consoles. For the sake of understanding, we're going to make this less foot trotting for ourselves and make it a medium sized world. Your starting season, I guess I should probably start from the top, right? I would, especially for the sake of this video and for your own, start in autumn. Why? Because, well, there's 4 seasons in a year. There's 4 seasons in this game. Excuse me, I say hydrate because I'm talking a lot. Autumn, winter, spring, summer. They go in that order. Autumn is the most neutral of the seasons, and it is the one you should be starting with, because that's the one I'm starting with too. And so I'm the one starting with that as well. I'll talk about the seasons more in detail as we get to them. But yes, ultimately I will say the overarching gameplay, especially for Just Core Survival, is this. It's sort of a bit of a joke. In autumn, you're spending all of autumn just preparing for winter. In winter, subsequently, you are preparing for spring. In spring, you are preparing for summer, and then it goes all the way back over to autumn. Unless you change those settings, but I digress. So, biomes, you're always going to choose together. If you choose classic, you're going to be missing on a few biomes that isn't necessary from Don't Starve 1 to Don't Starve Together, so just always cook this one. Spawn area is always default settings for different starting stuff. Now, here's a little bit interesting. Branches and loops. This is going to determine the general shape of your world. This game is procedurally generated and slightly randomly generated. I say that because having played multiple worlds, I've seen a lot of overlap with how the worlds generate and the tendency to put certain set pieces and certain, you know, biomes or ecological set pieces together. You see patterns, in other words. What I will say is this. If you want a true random-esque experience, you can leave these both on default. I am going to say branches only, so that makes it easier. The general gist is that, again, in general, the game's starting spot, your spawn at the floral pastern, is going to be in the general center-esque, as I rotate my mouse, and then things literally branch off from there, kind of like a flower or like a wild tree from looking down from the top. If you put loops, you get some things that will arc a little bit, and if you've left branching on, then they'll branch out a little bit, and then, yeah, in other words, you can be a little bit of a mess. But I digress. We're gonna go with branches out only, never worrying about loops, so we can always trust that either we're going to reach the end of a biome, or we're going to go further on from that biome into another one, and that one might end, etc. We just know that there's no other land probably to the right or the left or forward. It's got to go back, and then we got to enter another part from the relative central area. Leave roads on. Roads are not just for look in this game. You can make your own roads eventually, and we'll talk about turfing when it becomes relevant, but the game has a certain set amount of these really weird, you know, true to the Tim Burton-esque art style, wiggling roads. When you walk on a road, mobility is very important in this game. Your default walk setting, let's just say, is at 1.0. Roads, when you're on them, you move 25% faster. And that's going to be very good for traversal. It's also going to be very good for the basics of kiting, which is this game's primary mode of combat. That being said, that actually reminded me of something very key. Before you set any parameters up, I apologize, this is actually very important. Go back to your base game options from the home menu, and in your settings, you're going to go to advanced. This should absolutely be the same thing on PC and console. So I'll re-emphasize this much earlier in my Warley playthrough. The first thing you will do in this game is change your lag compensation. It will be default on predictive. Turn it off. I'm going to say this again. The first thing you need to do when playing this game, if you haven't already, is go into your settings. Sorry, go into options from the main menu. And from settings, go to advanced. Turn lag compensation from predictive to none. Turn it off. Why? Because kiting in combat is going to be insufferable if you don't. You are going to be hit by enemies when you are visibly not near them on screen, and it is going to be so frustrating. Always, always, always turn lag compensation off. Any other settings I really don't think are too relevant at the moment, especially not even for basics, because this is more about customizing certain things. How do you feel about sound effects, volume, ambient, HUD size? All of these things you can feel out on your own. I feel they're absolutely personal taste, so I'm going to leave those be. So, sorry, I digress. We were in world settings, so we're going to go medium-sized. Leave roads on, because you're going to want that extra speed until you get a certain item later in winter. Touchstones, okay. I'm going to be fair with you, and straight up, I'm going to make this as vanilla as possible. We're going to leave these on default. If you want an advantage for yourself, or more of a boon, I should say, turn these on to more or as much as possible, depending on whether or not you're on PC or you're on console. Same thing goes with failed survivors. The failed survivors are, you can see them by having like a skeleton of some kind on the ground, but usually strewn around them you have a certain items. These are called boons. Some of the boons are less exciting than others, but there is one particular boon that is so massive, if we get it, I'm going to have to ignore it because the likelihood of getting it is that small. Starting resources, let's just leave these at default. Okay, here's what I mean. Because this is a live service game, the game is always changing, relatively speaking, more and more as time goes on, so don't get me wrong, this is not lost on me. If I have to make adjustments to this series or this video, I wouldn't mind doing it again. As per some people who love games so much they do a free-to-play through of certain games. But anyway, don't worry about the Celestial Fissures, don't worry about this, and don't worry about the Terrarium. I believe these to be relatively advanced. Perhaps not the Terrarium, but anyway, leave it on. Okay, see what I mean about the overwhelming measure? This is the stuff that most people won't even look at because, one, they may not even fully understand or grasp the the fact of how many options that they have available and how this affects your game, to the point where they'll either opt out, this game's not for me, it's too overwhelming, or they'll just ignore it. Which, of course, attributes to your quality of life and your gameplay. I will say this. We're going to leave most of these on, again, at default, but one thing I am going to turn off is C-Stacks. If you're on console, do this anyway, because one, for anybody, Ocean is horrible. Two, I find that, especially on console, the less clutter is in the game, the easier and smoother it will run. For the more important stuff that you're going to start propagating and growing in your own world and building, etc. Spiky bushes, I'm going to put on less. They're not particularly useful to me. Tumbleweeds, I would put these on less because they're fun little things, but they're not absolutely necessary. Everything else will be fine. These are regular creatures. They are neutral to you. Most of them are. Some of them will attack you if you attack them first, naturally. Bees on default, Beefalo, who are very important in this game, we're going to leave on default. I'll leave buzzards on, but I actually turn them off because they're not really rewarding and they're just there to be an annoyance. Especially, depending on, since this is world generation, if you leave them on, you can't turn them off. So I usually opt having them off, but for the sake of this video and this series, I will leave them on. Carrots, you can leave them on. There again, if you don't want clutter, you can turn them off. We're not going to be spending too much time in the lunar biome. I do consider that to be a little bit of advanced area, but it's definitely going to be later, more like late spring. You'll think about hollow stumps. You can leave this alone. Same with the moles, salamanders, rabbits, pig houses. If you want an easier time, set your pig houses to more or lots or as much as possible, because just by having those houses available, you're getting access to a lot of really nice resources, and even tier 2 level resources that step up for free. But we are going to be using the pig houses for many reasons. Same goes with the Vault Goats. I don't think this determines how many herds you get. You usually get 1 to 2. You obviously guaranteed 1, but you maybe get 2 or 3. This, I believe, determines how fast the herd repopulates. And of course, we'll talk about herds when it becomes relevant. Same with lobster mounds or lobsters. Okay, obviously hostile creatures. If you want easy access to clockwork gears, then you might want to give yourself more, but be warned, there's 3 types of these guys, they all fight differently, and the bishop is the worst. He's a ranged enemy, and he's hard tracking, you know, it's really at your own risk. Is it a benefit? Sure, you have easy access to gears, but it's also a risk. Same thing with hound mounds, they give you your own deliberate hounds, where you can farm for some resources. Killer bees, I turn these guys off. They're just bees that are more obviously hostile to you, and they obviously go after you all the time. Let's just make things very basic for ourselves and just turn them off. Just trust me. Seaweeds, I'm turning them off as well. The ocean is already horrible. Let's make it less horrible and less cluttered at the same time. McTuskcaps. This is going to be very important. It's very basic, even though it's a more specialized, almost sub-boss-esque sort of thing. That comes around only during winter. I'm going to leave them on default for now, so we should at least have 1. Every world will have 1. We'll get to that later. Leaky Shacks. The swamp is an area that is a biome is already very dangerous. If you want to have an easier time, lower them. If you want to give yourself more of a challenge, I guess, or more of an inconvenience, rather, put them on more. These can be ignored because the game is going to generate enough as it is. And so we're going to leave them on default. Tentacles, we're going to leave them on default. You want to have an easier time for yourself, especially in the swamp, you can put them on less. But okay, with that is just 1 tab of 2 potential, 4 essentially, that you can deal with, but don't worry, we're not worrying about the games. Let's go on to world settings. Now, the game never really explains what these terms mean. This is how many days are going to be within a season. So naturally, I'm sure you understand when I say very short, you know how many days that means, right? Absolutely not. I didn't either. Had to look it up. So, here's what I will say. Of the 4 seasons that you get in this game, autumn and spring have the same lengths, and winter and summer have the same lengths relative to each other. So, in other words, let me explain all of the days you can get for autumn. Very short means 5 days. Short means 10 days. Default is 20 days. Long is 30 days. And very long, which is the highest you can go, is 50 days. And then there's the random days each year. I prefer to actually put it longer, but again, we're going to go default this whole way through. As far as summer and winter are concerned, this is 5 days. This is 10 days. This is 15 days. Okay, for winter and summer. Default is 15. This is 22, and I believe this is 30. I know that 32 is rather odd. But anyway, that's the lengths that you face. If you want to shorten them all to very short, just to technically get through a year, I wouldn't do that because autumn and spring, especially, you want to give yourself more time. So yeah, in theory, if you want to give yourself the best advantage, I would do this. But that's not what we're going to do here. I can't help what time you set it at. Just realize that we're going as vanilla as possible. Default settings and default times it is. Day type. This is very important. This game has a timer on it. Quite literally. 1 day in DST is 8 minutes in real life. So when you stop to think about it, we have 2015, 2015, so we have 70 days of survival. So we have 2 hours and 20 minutes for autumn and spring, and 2 hours for winter and summer. It's a good amount of time. But that's only for the days that go by. The day, as it goes by, kind of like in Pikmin, going from sunrise to sunset and then nighttime where you leave the world, that's not the case here. You are in the world constantly, hence the name is called the Constant. There is sunlight, there is dusk time, and then there is nighttime. Day tends to be the longest on autumn, but the lengths of each phase of day change. You can affect this here. Default is whatever the game's going to give you, and it's the one we're going to go with. If you want a longer day, which is more pure daylight, this is what this does. Longer dusk means you still have light, so you don't have to worry about the dark attacking you. But because your character is always worried about the looming dark that comes next, you're slowly losing sanity. And dark means, well, obviously more night. And I guess that's if you want to challenge yourself more, but that's not what we're here to do. No day means you'll just have dark and night, or dusk and night. You'll just have day and night. You'll just have day and dusk. Only day, only dark, only dusk, only night. Self-explanatory. If you want to give yourself the easiest time, which on full honesty I did for a little bit, is just day, just to get through the game's measures. I feel it was more prudent because I didn't have to stop to constantly do the task of making it out through the night. But again, we're going to try and be as vanilla as possible. We're going to leave it on default. Spawn mode, just always go to the full pass turn. I feel that's best. Survivor death, become a ghost. We're gonna leave this as default. I'm gonna try and mess with anything until we get to the Worley playthrough. We're gonna keep these all the same. I guess we'll keep Beefalomatic Season on, even though I find that annoying. You're gonna go ahead and turn the Crap Eye off. I am gonna give us a little bit of an edge, and then to be honest, the Crap Eye aren't difficult. They're just an extra measure that I don't feel warrants any more attention drawn to it. In other words, let's focus on the basics and learning the basics. Let's try and avoid obstacles that are a little bit too much. You may disagree, and I apologize, but these guys are involved in a key boss fight, which we actually aren't going to touch on in this basic playthrough. It's focusing on survival. But in other words, you'll get enough of the Crap Eye later. Now, here's where we're going to give ourselves a little bit of an edge. These events all have certain crafting options that are available to you. They allow for certain advantages and certain disadvantages because they have certain events going on in the world. We are going to lightly cheat and turn Winter's Fest on. Why? Let me explain. Winter's Fest allows for a lot more availability of certain things and in a way that isn't too giving to the player, because even though it gives you certain advantages, they still require attention that needs to be drawn from the player, and also, I feel it draws in line with the consideration of how Klei is feeling towards this game. This game is being more of, it's going to sound like a dirty word, but it's accessibility, and that's not particularly bad here. Realize that before, when I showed you the settings of survival, endless, and relaxed, that relaxed game wasn't there. The settings for reducing and taking away full punishments for starvation and temperature control and other stuff wasn't there. Klei is alright with the game being a bit more accessible. That being said, let's turn Winter's Fest on because it's going to allow for the crafting of a very useful item that does get properly superannuated later by a certain key boss. It also makes sense. We're not going to really touch on that boss too much, but I guess we can see how that goes because it takes a lot to fight that that very high-end boss. We'll get to the bosses at the bottom of this level. Okay, again, we're going to leave these on default because, like I was saying before, you can actually turn these things effectively off. You can make it non-fully punishing. That's up to you, but again, for the sake of this, we're going to leave these on default. I'm going to turn the alignment monsters off because you can't really get rid of them. See, you can get rid of sanity monsters. You can't really get rid of alignment monsters, at least not yet. Again, a live service game. We're going to leave the sanity monsters. If you want to make it easier on yourself, I would say little, because the sanity monsters do come with their own give and take. They do provide an item for you, a piece of loot that is valuable to you. So you aren't going to want to turn them off. But yeah, so go ahead and leave them on. Put them at little if you want to make it easier for yourself. Okay, the world in general. Okay, I'm a little split about this. Hound attacks are also another instance of the game's forcing you in... Again, I guess it's just true to the pure survival concept of making sure that you're never fully comfortable. And consider what I say when I say this, that one, not only is Klei okay with the game being more accessible, but they're also okay with the game becoming something else. I don't mean wholesale genre shift or something like that, but they're okay with the game going from a survival game purely to a survival action game, or a survival world builder, or stuff like that, or an action adventure, something like that. You can absolutely fully embrace these features, but that's again something more advanced. Just realize that that's the mentality behind it for me personally, and most likely what I feel from Klei. We're going to leave the hound attacks on. We're actually going to turn the fire hounds and ice hounds off. It's bad enough we have to deal with these guys every few days. The game is going to throw hounds at us deliberately on top of us, and it's to keep you on your toes and make sure that you're never fully comfortable and always fight them off. We're going to turn Frog Rain off. This is just annoying. If you're Wendy in the future, you can leave this on because it's actually a boon to you. But I digress. Petrification is just trees turning into rocks so you can mine them. We'll worry about that later. We're going to leave the hunt surprises on default and the hunts on default. If you want to make things easier for yourself, turn these to little and turn these to more or maximum. That's what I'll say on that. Lightning, we're going to turn lightning off. I know lightning rods exist in this game, but I find it very superfluous to be dealing with that when lightning can occur at any other time. And also consider that most of the time people will base in a biome where fires aren't even going to be a thing. I just find this tedious. I don't find it fun in any particular regard other than make sure you build this particular structure every few screens. It's just, yeah. You might feel different, but I apologize. We're going to leave meteors on because they're very important for a very key subquest. Side quest. We're going to leave rain on default. If you want to make things easier for yourself, make it little. Or if we're much like if you want to change day to only day, you can change it to none. But for the sake of this tutorial, I do feel it's the strong basics, and also consider that in the future, for advanced strategies, rain is actually going to very much be your friend. At first, not so much, but still. These are absolutely advanced, but don't worry, we're not even going to touch on them, so you don't even have to worry about disabling them. We're going to disable wildfires because, much like lightning, they only serve as a nuisance. Resource regrowth, I'm not going to touch this at all. This is just how fast the resources regrow in your world. But just for the vanilla experience, I'm going to leave that alone. Again, this really depends on how much clutter you want in your world. I don't even think we'll touch on Moon K exactly, or if we were to, we might do it as late as summer. But yeah, like I said, live service game, and they add whole sections to the game where it's really curious, honestly, how much I'm going to cover on basics, because they do allow you certain advantages, but this requires you to not only go on the ocean, it requires you to explore it. And yeah, I'm not sure if that's too much of a basic thing. As it is, we're not delving into the caves, really. And the caves have a very important... For its time, it was a late game sort of thing and high advantage resources. And of course, you could get rather confused because, again, this is what I was debating. People need to know the basics before they're ready to flower out and explore other options. So please realize the stuff that we're going here is just that it's just that. It's basics. It's tutorial mode. After that, things are, by design, meta, contextually, and internally supposed to be superannuated or superseded by other strategies, or the meta, if you will. So please, again, understand where I'm coming from. So at the moment, we're going to just leave these default. Regular creatures, these are more neutral creatures. We're going to leave these on default. I don't know why bunnymen are on here. I guess if you ever bring them up, you can. I'm going to turn grass geckos off because I find them more, again, more of an annoyance. They're not hostile to you, but they're more gimmicky in my opinion. Gobblers, okay, hear me out. I will leave them on. But I'm going to tell you right now, going forward, you're going to turn them off. Why? Because, again, they're really more of an annoyance, and they force you to bait things. But you know what? In that regard, now that I say it out loud, they actually are important enough to talk about, because you're going to want to learn the practice called baiting your farms, in case there are certain creatures, hostile or non, that tend to, you know, affect that farm. Gobblers go after berry bushes. Berries are a very important ingredient, especially if you're new to this game. The gobblers are all going to go after that. But you can bait your berry farms and actually use the gobblers as sources of meat. So we will leave them around. We'll leave the pangolins around, the pigs, the rabbits, lobsters. The shoals, we're not going to do much fishing because, my gosh, fishing is not only advanced, really, it's still rather niche. And again, it's more of an advanced, it's more in the advanced field. Also creatures. I'll tell you what, we'll leave bats on. I turned them off, and I know that excludes bats from me, but we'll leave them on for now. For the sake of this video. Cookie cutters, I'd like to turn them on to low, but again, I'm not even sure how much we're going to go into the ocean. Frogs, leave them on default. Hounds, these are just special types of hounds that only appear on a biome called the Lunar Isle. If you don't know what it is, don't worry, we're probably not even going to deal with them. Killer bees, I feel this is rather pointless to turn off because in spring, in each season, things change, and in spring, all bees that are just regular yellow honeybees become killer bees anyway. So I'm not even sure if turning this off even changes anything. Worms will leave as default Magtusk. This just changes how often he respawns. We're going to change it to as much as possible. So if you're on console, change it to more. Lure plants, we're going to change these to as much as possible because lure plants are quite possibly the best naturally occurring resource in the game, and you'll see why later. Mooncave pirates, if you find the ocean to be problematic, which everybody does, we don't like it anyway, you can turn them off. I'm going to turn them off, and let me explain why. Okay, naturally they're supposed to be pointing you towards Mooncave Island, but I'm not even sure if we're going to do that, and even if you don't do that, there is a much better way to find Mooncave Island. It involves character switching, which we are going to cover as a side quest in this game. Moonpangles are just like an alteration of that. Mosquitoes are just annoying enemies that come into the swamp, which is already a very dangerous biome. These guys just cause an annoyance. They don't do a lot of damage. They're just like there, like I said, to annoy you. We're going to leave them on for the purpose of this video. Sharks, turn them off. Just turn them off. They don't do anything helpful, they don't provide anything worthwhile, and they're just there to be an issue to you. And if you don't believe me, for anybody from beginners to seasoned players to experts, maybe I'll point you to one of Glurm's videos. He lost a Megabase World to one of these. I'm going to turn the Scudder Squids off because, again, they're just more clutter, they're more annoyance, and of course they're associated with the ocean, so don't worry too much about that. We're going to leave the spiders and the warriors off. Giants. This is the last thing we're going to have to cover. Oh my gosh, I'm excited. We're going to get to gameplay. I do apologize, but I am trying to deflate the infuriation and the confusion that might come from these settings from the eyes of a seasoned player. So, these giants are effectively bosses. Well, mostly. These guys right here, these four, actually I should say these five. Albatross, Spider Queen, Tree Guards, Poison Birch Nut Trees, and Lord of Fruit Flies. These guys are mini-bosses. We have 4 seasons, right? Well, we have 4 seasonal giants, 1 for each season. Bearger, we're probably not going to see in this playthrough. Sad. Don't worry about Bearger, though. I'll get to him in the playthrough that succeeds this one. He is the boss of spring, but he only starts spawning on day 30 of spring. So in other words, unless you change your daytime length from autumn from default to long, you're not going to see one of these guys. and you won't see them until the following year. Deerclops. Leave Deerclops on. I know she's a huge and bad example, really bad at excuse me. She's super bad in that she's a very upfront example of a bad quit moment or a quit wall for other players in this game. She comes up in winter. Leave her on. Her loot is incredibly important. And learning how to deal with annoyances like her is actually going to be very key to advanced gameplay tactics in the future. Crab King. Oh, we're not going to deal with Crab King. This is basic stuff. He is part of a chain of, not side quests, but a main quest even, that links with other side quests, and his fight is on the ocean. Enough said. Claws. We're not going to cover him. These guys, if I said these guys are mini-bosses, I would arrange the seasonal bosses of Berger, Deerclops, Berger for autumn, Deerclops for winter. Moose Goose is the seasonal boss of spring, and Antlion is the seasonal boss of summer. These guys I would categorize as regular bosses. And so is the Eye of Terror. Not his super form, his regular form. His super form I would coincide along with Crab King, Claws, Bee Queen, and Dragonfly. These are strike bosses, or bosses that are really meant for more than one player. Can you? Of course, but that is obviously advanced. And since we're doing this on our own, I feel like covering them is really going to be more of an advanced thing. So let's deal with mini-bosses and regular bosses. Is it true that fighting these strike bosses give you a load of more opportunities? Sure, but again, as a basic tutorial thing, I don't want to overload people with information. Let's learn the basics first. And that's just going to be about survival. Once you get those good habits going, and then they feel like, you know, second nature, then we can worry about our other options going forward. Okay, since we're not really going to deal with caves, you can hear more about these on my Warly walkthrough, which will hopefully come out in, I hope, the next few months, maximum. I was going to do a Warly walkthrough first, but then again, for reasons I already iterated in this playthrough, if you're on console, you're not going to have this tab. If you're on PC, you're going to have this tab. It's for mods. Don't worry, I'm not going to be using any of these other mods, even though I feel that they would be very useful. Actually, you know what? Now I take it back. I'm going to turn epic health bars on. So when we do fight bosses, you have an idea of what the health pool looks like in difference to other things in the world. Let's see, what else do I feel would be just better overall. I would turn boss announcement on, but I feel that's a little bit much. Even though this would help with the annoying aspect of Hound Waves, we'll digress. I digress. This other stuff, yeah, this is extra stuff. This is other stuff that can be more advanced. I'm tempted to put on simple health bars, but I mean, it is better illustration. You know what? Fine. We'll turn simple health bars on. I understand you won't have the advantage of something aggroing to you and then seeing its health bar, thereby telegraphing quite clearly that something is aggroing onto you. But please bear with me. Most of my stuff, hands down, is quality of life. I have chronic tendonitis, so I use Action Q Reborn with the mouse. I switch between mouse and controller. I'm more comfortable with controller, but for repetitive activities, just to axe that out for the sake of my arms and my tendons in my arms, I use Action Q Reborn with my mouse. I understand that you can't do that on console. My sympathies, because I played on console again for 2.5 years. It's not particularly fun. I'm going to play with Clean HUD. You know what? I'm tempted to turn it off so that it's more familiar to you, but I think I'll keep it on just because, again, for visual quality. I'm going to use a mod called Combined Stats. Combined Stats pretty much offers up what you can only get in when you enter like a subscreen menu, when you actually get a numerical value on console on your icons. Again, just to make this a clear through line, I'm not going to use Crockpot Repeater in this playthrough because, well, I'm going to play much more like you guys. I'm going to turn aerial view off. It just gives me an extra advantage. I am going to keep the DST OST remake on. Why? Because I feel like that's going to, if we do play with some more regular music. My only problem with this game is that the music only plays when you're doing stuff, like as in work stuff, like as in crafting things, and you're actually not doing that all the time. So, you know what? I'm going to leave it on, but the music is still going to be set to off. I'm going to have my own music playing in the background like I do with my streams. It shouldn't be distracting at all. Geometric placement. This is very much quality of life. This is just so that I don't have to worry about... This is just for better organization. You can get the gist. This is something that's also learned naturally. I could do it vanilla, just like how I did on console, but again, because of my tendonitis and my tendency to be a perfectionist for placement, I'm just going to leave this on for my own sake. Idea testing. All this is doing is changing the quality of life on what noises things make. So once again, this is just for better viewing pleasure than anything else. It's not really changing the dynamics of the gameplay. Play statues I have on. Snapping Tills is another one. If you, again, like I said, unfortunately, it is fact. If you were playing on console, you were playing the inferior version of this game. My heart goes out to you, because it was the same thing with me when I was on console. Growing giant crops, more specifically, is a pain and a half, because there's nothing to put, proper ergonomic placement. Snow tile disappearing. I would recommend this, again, as another quality of life sort of thing, but when the snow covers the ground, all it means is that you're just gonna be forced to physically look at your map menu to know where things are, rather than having to worry about the snow on the ground. So I'm gonna leave this on. World settings picker. This just allows me to change settings while in game, so I don't have to quit out of my file and then manually go to these screens to change stuff and then reinstall the game, or reinitiate the game. So there's an explanation for my mods. We only have quality of life stuff up, so that's better for your viewing pleasure. And it helps me show off certain attack values and stuff like that. The last one is the rollback. For those of you who are not familiar, this is always going to be empty on a new file, because you can think of these as the last 5 times your game has been saved. If at any point, even during in-game, when you go to its in-game menu, you can choose to roll back to certain points, or certain save points. And I will say this right now. There is a very unfortunate stigma that if you roll back, you're a loser, or there can be that lousy, snobbish, elitist mentality. Don't listen to that. Especially if you're new to this game, and to especially avoid that quit moment more and more. If something goes incredibly bad one day, roll it back. Roll it back, do it over again. This is about learning to play the game. You can set more limitations on yourself later. So, with that being said, I know I had to back out without saving things. So let's go ahead and rechristen our world. And with that, I do believe we can actually begin playing the game. So when I click the button, or if you're on mouse, when you click Generate World, it's going to start us off, and it's going to start the game. Now, as soon as it generates the world, I wish it had the old Don't Starve 1 setting for this, but I digress. The first thing you're going to be given is the character menu. There are 17 characters in this game, and I know just the perfect character we're going to be playing through with this game. It's not going to be Warley, because obviously I'll be doing that in the Warley walkthrough. I'll explain more when you see them. I suppose I should take this time to mention this, delineation. This is being streamed raw footage on Twitch. This is not all required. I just figured that if I'm going to play a session, I might as well stream it for anybody who live has a question. So I do apologize if the motion is... I'll try not to... I'm not going to intentionally interact with chat too much, because again, this is more to be expository and a tutorial. But this is just if anybody is interested in the raw footage, the whole journey unedited and stuff like that. There is going to be an edited version of these videos. So if you want the clip notes essentially, or the play-by-play, or the TLDR with much better editing, it's going to be completely post commentary, and it's going to be fully edited, even with its own music track going on. But yeah, there's going to be 2 series effectively going on. These, of course, the raw footage is going to be out first, and then gradually and surely I'm going to go ahead and edit these down to much more bite-sized chunks, as well as hopefully better articulating in a better paraphrase fashion, summarizing my thoughts. That being said, here are our characters. if you're new to the game, these two characters are actually going to be... Actually, no, sorry. This, Wartox, Wormwood, Wirt, and Wanda are going to be unavailable to you. Don't worry about them. I'll tell you about them in a much more advanced setting later. All you need to know is that in true Clay fashion, they give you a little example or a hint about the certain principles governing these characters over here. In other words, not fully describing to you, only hinting to you at what it means. It's up to you to understand this. But here's the niche. Unless you fulfill a certain side quest, once you choose the character here on this menu, you cannot switch to another character until and unless you do a side quest. We are going to do it, but for the sake of this being tutorial mode, we're going to start with Wilson P. Higsbury. Why is Wilson important? Well, aside from being the face of... Oh, sorry. I clicked something on my keyboard. Well, aside from being the face of DST, he is the pinnacle character for any good good game to get your footing on as a player character, because he's totally vanilla. His strength is he has no weaknesses. His weakness is he has no strengths. Or to be more exact in terms of character quality and character attributes, his strength is he has no restrictions. His weakness is he has no advantages. That also being said, Clay more recently, and as a result of this footage and this recording, has started a new trend in the game in the form of skill trees. Wilson was the first to receive the skill trees, and his skill tree is certainly advantageous in certain degrees, but not quite as much as others. So I like the idea in that they still kept the concept of him being the vanilla basic character, which again is very strong for players who are new, because you already have enough to worry about learning about how the gameplay goes and all that other stuff. He does have one advantage though, and you'll see here he grows a magnificent beard. Well, why is that important? Well, it's going to provide insulation. And what is the first season you encounter after autumn, the most neutral season, or the only neutral season? It's winter. And in winter, you have a very significant danger of being very cold. So, in essence, he has a slight plus already going for him. He grows a beard, so he makes it easier for you to not worry about freezing too much. He doesn't enter with anything in hand. He's not the only one that enters with nothing in hand. No, sorry, that's more specifically the word. But that doesn't necessarily mean too much aside from whatever specifics are for that character. Again, for the purpose of tutorial mode, we're not going to worry about that. So, let's begin in earnest.